Good evening. It's always a little bit of a show stealer to have a dog with you, but couche-toi. Bon chien. Let me tell you a story. It was a few years ago. It was sunny. I was wearing my dark wraparound sunglasses, going down the street fairly quickly with my dog, and I overheard two people talking to one another. And they spoke just loud enough that I could hear them. "Oh, isn't it sad? He's blind and in a wheelchair." Ha! I stopped, turned around. Yeah, but I'm not deaf. The thing is, most people don't realize that service dogs are not just guide dogs. There's a whole range. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know about accessibility. And here's one that you probably don't know that you don't know. If you have a website, you sell products, you sell services, chances are it's not accessible for disabled people. A recent study showed that out of the 1 million top homepages on the web, each page had an average of 57 accessibility defects. 57. That's a lot. What's a lot is the percentage of disabled people. In the United States, right now, there's a quarter of the adult population that has a disability. So unless you consciously went about making your website accessible, it won't be. But don't just take my word for it. You can check yourself. There's 3 things you can do. First, you can use your keyboard and use the tab key to go forwards, the shift and tab key to go backwards. Are you able to reach all interactive elements? Links, buttons, form elements. Are you able to see where the focus is? Because if you can go all over the place, but you don't see where it is, that's not useful. So that's the first thing, keyboard. The second thing is contrast. Can you actually see your text against the background? Someone with low vision is going to really appreciate good contrast. And guess what? The approximately 80% of people that go to your website on a mobile phone outside in full sun will also appreciate good contrast, right? The third thing you can do is if you have videos or audio file on your website is make sure you have transcript and caption, but not just automated captions. Deaf people and hard of hearing people call those craptions. You have to make sure you edit for accuracy. If it's not accurate, you might as well not have it. So, as I was introduced, I'm an accessibility expert. I help companies build digital assets that work for disabled people. And I want to tell you 3 main things today. The importance of accessibility, I touched on that a little bit. How accessibility work is not a one and done project. It's ongoing. And finally, how you can leverage the power of building a network of champions. So obviously, I'm a wheelchair user. A lot of people refer to me as wheelchair bound. You'll notice I am not tied to my wheelchair. If I were, maybe it would be kinky. But seriously, when you think about wheelchair bound, you think about limitation. When in fact my wheelchair, it's a tool of freedom. It's without the wheelchair that I get stuck. The other time that I get stuck is if I'm in my wheelchair and the only way into the building is a flight of steps. It's similar for my friend Raymond. He's blind. He uses software called a screen reader to interact on the web. And with his assistive technology, he's got access to the entire web. Unless you have a website that has 57 accessibility defects on the homepage, and then he's stuck. It's a similar thing for my friend Julia, who's deaf. I mentioned transcript and captions, and it makes sense. You know, if you can't hear and you have an audio bit and you don't have captions or transcripts, you'll have a problem. But it's more than that. Imagine this. There's a wildfire creeping up on your city. You don't know if you have to evacuate or not. And all the announcements are either only on the radio or on television with no caption. How scary is that? You don't know if you actually have to leave or not. This is where accessibility is not just important, it's actually life or death. So accessibility is important. I can talk about this, do we have a week, and I'll still be talking about this. But let's look at how accessibility is not a project. I've been doing this a very long time, nearly 30 years. And the typical story with my clients is they build something, then they get a complaint. Someone with a disability isn't able to use their product. So they panic a little bit, they hire an auditor, they get everything tested. The audit report returns a gazillion issues, and they go, oh my God, there's so much to do. But they get to it, and they fix things. And then they've remediated everything. They're really happy. They congratulate themselves, pat on the back. And they treated accessibility as a one and done. They treated it as we have a start, a middle, and an end. But they haven't learned anything. They haven't done training. They haven't changed the culture of accessibility within the organization. And guess what? They are at the mercy of the next complaint. They are at the mercy of the next lawsuit. There's 4,000 accessibility-related lawsuits in the United States alone every year. You want to avoid that. You don't want to be stuck on the back foot. You don't want to think about accessibility as a start, a middle, and an end. It's a continuous project. You build a new feature, think about accessibility. You're doing QA testing, think about accessibility. Think about it at all stages, all the life cycle of the project. The final really important bit when you're trying to become more accessible, more inclusive, is you build a network of champions. What's a network of champions? Well, it's a bunch of champions. It's people who understand the basic of accessibility. They don't have to be expert, but they care. And when you have a design coming up, they'll say, hey, have we thought about this? And when somebody else is working on something, they can go to your champion and they can say, is this thing we're building actually working for disabled people? A network of champions is going to be a little bit like the pandemic. It's going to spread because champions are excited about what we do. And this excitement kind of goes from one person to the next. And suddenly, you may start with 10 champions, and within a few months, you're going to have 50 champions. And before you know it, accessibility is part of the DNA of your organization. You don't have to think about accessibility anymore. It just happens. And my friend Raymond is able to use your website. And my friend Julia is able to actually hear what's going on. And I'm able to get into the building. So I spoke about the importance of accessibility. I spoke about how it's not a project. I spoke about champions. And I'm hoping that when you go home tonight, when you go back to work the next day, you're going to do one thing. I want you, and you, and you, and you, to be the first accessibility champion in your organization. Evangelize for accessibility as if your life depends on it. Because Monday, it might. Thank you.